"You are a traitor," shouted my father, the general, tearing off my uniform in front of everyone, until they saw the tattoo on my back. An admiral slowly stood up, eyes wide open in fear, and whispered, "Sir, my God, she outranks you." My father went pale. Since childhood, Sarah Whitmore had never known a life that didn't revolve around the military. She grew up on bases, celebrated birthdays inside hangars, and learned how to salute before she could tie her own shoes. Her father, General Richard Whitmore, was a legend in the United States Army, a man spoken about with reverence, fear, and admiration in equal measure. To the world, he was a war hero, a master tactician, a decorated leader who shaped entire doctrines. To Sarah, he was a distant shadow of greatness, an impossible standard cast in metals and iron. Everyone expected her to follow in his footsteps, and so she did, not because she wanted to, but because no other path was truly offered to her. Enrolling at West Point had never been a question. It was an unspoken command. From her earliest drills to the cold rigidity of command structures, she learned quickly. But unlike her father, Sarah questioned things. She questioned the necessity of certain orders, the morality of blindly following a chain of command, and the blurred lines between duty and conscience. These thoughts she kept to herself. There was no room for doubt in the house of Whitmore. At 29, Sarah had recently been promoted to lieutenant and assigned to a top-tier strategic training base in the Nevada desert. The mission was a month-long simulation exercise replicating conflict scenarios across multiple terrains and command hierarchies. She was told it would be intense, that it would challenge her ability to lead under pressure. What they failed to mention, perhaps on purpose, was that the exercise would be led by none other than her father. Her transport touched down at the airstrip just after 7 o'clock in the morning. The heat shimmered off the tarmac like waves. Sarah stepped out of the aircraft, shoulders squared, boots polished, and eyes masked behind regulation sunglasses. There were salutes exchanged, clipped greetings, but her father was not there to welcome her. He wouldn't be. That wasn't his style. She found him later that day inside the Central Command tent, surrounded by digital maps, ranking officers, and advisors. He didn't look up when she entered. He simply said, "Lieutenant Whitmore, you're late." His voice carried the weight of authority and disappointment, like it always had. Sarah didn't flinch. "Reporting for duty as assigned, sir," she said, standing at full attention. Only then did he glance at her. His eyes didn't soften. They measured her, assessed her like any other soldier. Whatever flicker of paternal recognition might have existed was buried beneath layers of uniform, protocol, and rank. For the rest of the day, the two worked side by side, though hardly a word passed between them outside of orders and confirmations. The simulation was immense in scale, one of the most complex the Army had ever constructed. It incorporated real-time AI assessments, randomized scenario injections, and multi-unit coordination spread across various divisions. Sarah's unit had been tasked with reconnaissance and rapid response logistics. The operations were to begin at dawn the next morning. Later that night, inside her assigned barracks, Sarah removed her boots and let herself breathe for the first time since arriving. She thought about how surreal it felt to serve under her own father, to stand at attention while he evaluated her as if she were just another name on a roster. But that was their relationship, distant, professional, and bound by duty. The last time they had spoken outside a military context was years ago, when her mother's funeral had forced them into the same room for more than 10 minutes. Still, something stirred in her. Not anger, not bitterness, but an unease that she couldn't place. It wasn't just the tension between them or the pressure of the simulation. It was something heavier, older, like the feeling you get before a storm. The sensation that something big was coming, and that when it arrived, nothing would ever be the same. The next morning, the operation began. Sarah's team moved swiftly through the simulated desert terrain, following standard infiltration protocols. She coordinated movements with precision, her voice calm and clear over comms. Her father, observing from the main command center, issued directives to the various units, testing their adaptability. By noon, they encountered their first moral dilemma. A civilian convoy was simulated entering the zone, unknowingly putting themselves at risk. The scenario demanded a call, intercept a convoy and break cover, or allow the simulation proceed, sacrificing them for strategic advantage. The command center issued the order, stand down, do not reveal position. Sarah hesitated, and that hesitation, brief, subtle, but visible, was the first spark. She followed the order, but not without letting the doubt show. Her second-in-command noticed. Her father certainly noticed. And when the simulation ended that day, she was summoned, not to be debriefed, but to be questioned. Inside the officer's briefing room, her father stood alone. "You paused," he said. "Insubordination begins with hesitation." "I followed the order," Sarah replied, calmly. "But you doubted it." She met his gaze. "Because sometimes doubt is necessary, sir." That night, rumors began to swirl among the ranks. Not about her hesitation, but about the way her father looked at her afterward, like he saw something foreign in her, something dangerous. She had always been the prodigy, the soldier child, the daughter who bore his name like a medal. But now, for the first time, she saw it in his eyes, uncertainty. And in that uncertainty, something else took root, something darker, something that would soon explode in front of everyone. The simulation entered its third day with escalating intensity. While Sarah's unit had performed with near-flawless execution, whispers were already rippling through the camp. Quiet exchanges between lieutenants and junior officers about a fracture, a hesitation. Nothing official had been said, but in an environment governed by precision and instinct, doubt spread faster than truth. Inside the strategy tent, the command staff received new orders from Central Operations. The next simulation would mimic an urban conflict zone in the fictional region of Sector 9, mirroring the complexities of asymmetric warfare. Insurgents hiding among civilians, compromised infrastructure, and misleading intelligence. The objective was to neutralize a high-value target suspected of planning a large-scale attack, without incurring collateral damage. The challenge was clear. The margin for error was non-existent. General Whitmore assembled the lead officers at 7 o'clock sharp in the main operations room. Sarah stood to the side, arms folded behind her back, flanked by peers who avoided meeting her eyes. Her father paced the length of the digital display screen, voice crisp, clipped, and absolute. The insurgents are suspected to be operating from Building Delta in the northern quadrant. You'll be given authorization for a coordinated drone strike, followed by ground sweep. Civilian casualties are to be minimized. Use thermal imaging to confirm hostile presence before initiating. His eyes swept the room before landing briefly on Sarah. This is not a drill within a drill. You will act as if lives are on the line. That includes consequences for disobedience. The team nodded in unison. No questions. No hesitation. That was the expectation. Hours later, Sarah crouched behind the partial wall of a crumbled overpass, peering through augmented reality binoculars that fed her real-time heat signatures from the target structure. The building showed multiple heat sources, clustered on 3 floors. The thermal imaging was inconclusive. One signature matched the estimated profile of the target, but the others, smaller, more erratic, could easily be civilians or decoys. A voice crackled through her comms. "Command authorizes strike. Repeat, Building Delta is greenlit. Confirm readiness." Her second-in-command, Lieutenant Harris, looked to her, hand hovering near the drone control interface. "Orders, ma'am?" Sarah didn't answer immediately. Her eyes remained fixed on the building's overlay. "Ma'am," Harris repeated. She exhaled slowly. "The imaging isn't clear. Those signatures on the 3rd floor, they're scattered, small, could be non-combatants." "Command says the target is verified," Harris said. "They want the hit." Sarah toggled the secondary sensor data, environmental shifts, audio feeds, minor vibrations. She keyed into one detail. A child's laughter, faint, almost missed, coming from inside the building. She leaned back. "Abort the strike," she said. Harris froze. "Ma'am, you heard me. We do not fire. We recon. I'm not taking out civilians on a simulation because someone wants to play God with a drone." There was a beat of silence before Harris complied, muttering under his breath, but issuing the abort sequence. The drone, seconds away from launch, powered down with a faint mechanical sigh. The fallout was immediate. An hour later, back at base, Sarah was summoned once again, this time not alone. The room was packed with senior personnel, including General Whitmore and Rear Admiral Langston, whose presence elevated the matter from internal disciplinary to high-level scrutiny. General Whitmore did not sit. He stood behind the central briefing table, rigid, arms crossed behind his back, like a statue chiseled from stone. "Lieutenant Whitmore," he said without preamble, "you were given a lawful order. Why did you refuse it?" Sarah stood at attention, her voice steady. The data was inconclusive. The risk to civilian lives was too high for a simulated kill. I opted for recon and extraction instead. "This was not your call," he snapped. "You disobeyed a direct command issued in accordance with operational parameters. The mission required immediate neutralization of the threat. With respect, sir," Sarah said, "we were told to minimize civilian casualties. I followed the spirit of the mission objective." "You defied a standing order," he said, his voice rising. "This isn't about spirit or intuition. It's about discipline." Rear Admiral Langston, until then silent, finally spoke. "Let's remember, General, that the scenario was meant to test decision-making under pressure. Technically, she did not disobey. It was within her command jurisdiction to call for mission adjustment if new intelligence arose." General Whitmore turned to him. "The problem is not technicality. It's ideology. She believes she knows better than her command. That's insubordination." Sarah's fists clenched at her sides, but she kept her tone even. "I believe in protecting the innocent, sir." The room grew cold. General Whitmore took a step forward, jaw tight. "You are a soldier. Your beliefs do not override your orders." "And what happens when the orders are wrong?" she asked. "That did it." With a fury that caught even the Admiral off guard, General Whitmore crossed the room and slammed his palm against the table. "You are a traitor," he roared. "You've shamed this uniform, this base, and everything this military stands for." The room froze. Several officers looked away. Some stiffened to attention. Langston's eyes narrowed and his jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Then came the unthinkable. Whitmore walked up to Sarah and, with both hands, grabbed the top of her uniform jacket. "Let me show them what betrayal looks like," he said through gritted teeth, then ripped the jacket open, buttons flying, exposing the shirt underneath. Then that too. He pulled it down past her shoulders in one violent motion, revealing the skin of her upper back. What he had meant to be an act of humiliation transformed instantly into something else entirely. The room did not react with scandal or laughter. No one moved. No one spoke. Because there, inked into the skin between Sarah's shoulder blades, was a symbol they were never meant to see. A symbol no one had seen in decades. A crest shaped like an eagle with outstretched wings over a black triangle. Ancient, cryptic, and unmistakable to the few who recognized it. Rear Admiral Langston dropped the folder in his hand. He stepped forward slowly, eyes locked on the tattoo. "My God," he whispered, voice hoarse. "Sir, she outranks you." General Whitmore stepped back, face losing color instantly. The room remained frozen, air sucked from it like a vacuum. Langston straightened. "That emblem is not cosmetic. It's classified level Alpha Black. No one outside of direct authorization from Central Command even knows it exists." He turned to Sarah. "Lieutenant Whitmore, I need confirmation. Who gave you that mark?" Sarah pulled her shirt back up with calm precision. "I cannot disclose, sir." Langston nodded slowly. "Then I already have my answer." A silence followed, deeper than any before it. In that silence, careers shifted, fates altered, and the room that had moments ago been poised for punishment now stood in terrified reverence of the woman they had almost condemned. The moment Sarah exited the operations room, the air outside felt thinner, charged, alive with the weight of what had just occurred. The desert sun beat down, but the burn on her skin came not from heat, but from the stares. Soldiers she had worked alongside for days now avoided her gaze or looked too long, unsure if they were seeing appear a superior or something far stranger. The walk back to her quarters was slow. Every step echoed with what had not been said in that room. Not a single reprimand had followed General Whitmore's outburst. No one had stopped him from tearing her uniform, but they had all seen the mark. And that changed everything. Her room, once just another temporary corner in a sea of identical spaces, felt foreign when she entered. The door hissed shut behind her, and she leaned against it, eyes closed, trying to still her heartbeat. Her shirt hung loosely from her shoulders, still torn, one sleeve missing entirely. She looked down at the buttons scattered in her hand and let them fall to the floor. A few minutes passed before the knock came. It was brisk, not hesitant. She opened the door to find Lieutenant Harris, standing rigid, eyes straight ahead. "Ma'am," he said, voice tight, "you've been summoned to the debriefing hall. Immediate attendance requested." Sarah said nothing. She nodded, grabbed a clean regulation shirt, pulled it on without bothering with full dress, and followed him out. The base's debriefing hall was not commonly used. It served as a venue for visiting dignitaries or court-martials, rarely anything in between. Inside, the lighting was dimmed, the windows sealed with blast-resistant shades, and a half-moon of senior officers occupied the elevated seats, looking down at the floor where a single table and chair waited. Sarah stepped into the room, chin high. As she approached the center, she saw a civilian among the officers. That was unusual. He wore a gray suit, thin glasses, and held a secure tablet on his lap. She didn't recognize him, but something about his demeanor marked him as someone not used to being questioned. Rear Admiral Langston sat in the center of the half-moon. "Lieutenant Whitmore," he began, "please be seated." Sarah complied, her posture composed, betraying nothing. "We are convened under Article 9 of the Simulated Operations Code," he continued. "However, the nature of today's discussion may fall under classifications not covered by standard military protocol. Before we proceed, do you acknowledge that the information presented, either by you or to you, may be subject to national security restrictions and non-disclosure of indefinite duration?" "I acknowledge," Sarah said without hesitation. Langston glanced at the man in the gray suit. "This is Director Ellis from the Office of Strategic Anomalies," Langston said. "He has been cleared for level Black Eagle observation. He will not be questioning you directly unless deemed necessary." Sarah said nothing, but her gaze shifted toward Ellis, measuring him. His eyes didn't meet hers. Instead, he typed something on the tablet. Langston cleared his throat. "Lieutenant, we will avoid unnecessary details, but let me be direct. Your tattoo, do you confirm it as the operational insignia of Black Eagle Protocol Directive 9? "I confirm," Sarah answered. The murmurs among the officers rippled like water against stone. Not one of them had ever heard such words spoken aloud. "And do you confirm," Langston continued, "that you are activated under Executive Order 0097, with full field authority independent of standing ranks and reporting lines?" "I do." Langston leaned back. "Then by every definition of military protocol, you outrank everyone in this room." No one spoke. Even General Whitmore, seated at the far right end of the half-circle, was silent, hands clenched on the arms of his chair, face unreadable. "But here's the issue," Langston said. "You never declared this authority until now. Your presence here was undocumented. Your integration into the simulation exercise was not pre-approved by Black Eagle liaison channels. Can you explain why?" Sarah looked around the room before answering. "I was instructed to embed without activation," she said. "My presence was necessary to assess an internal integrity risk. I was not to reveal my position unless directly compromised." Langston raised an eyebrow. "And were you compromised?" "My uniform was forcibly removed during an unsanctioned confrontation," she said plainly. There was no choice. The officer stirred again, but Langston held up a hand. "Understood. Then let's address the next concern. Why this base? Why now? What integrity risk warranted a level 9 infiltration?" There it was, the real question. Sarah took a breath, then replied, "Project Colorado." The silence that followed was deeper than any before. The name was like a dead language, a ghost everyone remembered but refused to speak. Director Ellis finally looked up. "That project has been sealed for over 20 years. Why invoke it now?" Because the consequences of what happened there are not over, Sarah said. Because individuals in this room were involved. And because oversight failed to account for those consequences re-emerging in operational theaters. Langston's voice lowered. Do you have evidence? Not all of it yet, Sarah replied, but enough to continue. Ellis leaned forward slightly. Are you implying this entire operation, the simulation, was a setup for observation? Sarah didn't answer him. Her eyes moved to General Whitmore. He stood slowly, his voice gravelly. This is absurd. She's accusing me of something she doesn't even understand. No, sir, Sarah said, her voice sharp. I understand perfectly. I understand what was covered up in those mountains. I understand who signed the seal files. I understand that you chose silence over accountability. General Whitmore's nostrils flared. You have no idea what we faced back then. Then tell them, she said. Tell them what happened. He looked at Langston, then at the other officers, then back at her, but he said nothing. Langston stood next. That's enough for today. Sir, I'm not finished. You are for now, Langston said, firm. Director Ellis will debrief you separately. Your clearance has been elevated. You'll be escorted to a secure comm station and remain under limited base access until further review. Sarah stood. As she turned to leave, Ellis called after her. One more question, Lieutenant. She stopped. If your assignment was to observe and report, what exactly have you reported so far? Sarah looked at him over her shoulder. Everything, she said. Then she walked out the hall, her boots echoing in the stillness, leaving behind a room full of men and women who believed themselves untouchable until the truth began to crack their walls. Rear Admiral Langston had never been known as a man who lost his composure. For decades, he had commanded fleets, negotiated sensitive military treaties, and sat in closed chambers where truths darker than war itself were discussed behind locked doors. Those who served under him called him a relic of a different era, someone whose measured silence often carried more weight than a dozen speeches from other men in uniform. Yet now, as he left the debriefing hall after dismissing Sarah Whitmore, his hand trembled. He concealed it well, folding it behind his back as he walked, but the tremor was there. He had recognized the emblem on her back, not in the abstract sense, not as some dusty memory of a forgotten program, but intimately. He had seen it once before, carved into the metal of a classified operations file that he had sworn never to speak of again, and the implications of that mark being on Sarah Whitmore's skin were catastrophic. In the narrow corridor outside the hall, General Whitmore caught up to him. His face, flushed from the heated exchange with his daughter, betrayed no regret, only frustration. You know what that was? Richard Whitmore said, his voice low and sharp. You know it shouldn't exist anymore. Langston stopped walking. His eyes remained forward, unblinking. I know exactly what it means, which is why you should be careful with every word you speak from this point forward. Richard grabbed his arm, forcing him to turn. She is my daughter, my blood, whatever she's involved in, whatever ghost she's carrying. Langston cut him off with a glare, so cold it silenced even a general. Do not insult me by pretending you didn't see this coming. You of all people knew the risks. If she bears that mark, it is because someone above you made sure of it. Richard's grip loosened, but his voice rose in defiance. Above me? There is no one above me in this theater. Not anymore, Langston said, his words deliberate, weighted. That girl outranks us both, and you know it, which makes every decision you've made in her presence subject to review, including what you did today. Richard's jaw tightened. You think I care about reviews? About politics? She humiliated me in front of my men. Langston leaned closer. No, you humiliated yourself. And now, thanks to your outburst, every officer in that room has seen what should have remained buried. Before Richard could respond, the suited man, Director Ellis, appeared at the end of the corridor, walking briskly, his expression unreadable. He didn't acknowledge either of them, but his mere presence was enough to break the confrontation. Richard released Langston's arm, and the Admiral resumed walking, his mind already turning over possibilities. Later that evening, Langston requested a private meeting with Sarah. Not in the debriefing hall, not in the command tent, but in one of the base's seldom-used archives, a room lined with classified simulation records that only a handful of officers had keys to. Sarah arrived promptly, still in uniform but stripped of insignia, standard protocol when one's rank existed in shadows rather than in medals. She closed the door behind her and spoke first. "You wanted to see me, sir." Langston studied her face, looking for signs of hesitation. He found none. "Lieutenant, or perhaps I should address you differently?" "You may address me as Lieutenant Whitmore," she said. "That is a capacity I operate under here." His lips pressed into a thin line. "Very well, Lieutenant. What you carry on your back is not a symbol meant to be exposed. Do you understand what kind of storm you've unleashed?" "I didn't expose it," she replied calmly. "It was exposed for me. I followed my orders. My father did not." The Admiral circled the room slowly, his polished shoes echoing faintly against the concrete floor. "You have no idea how many people will demand answers after today. Men in this base will write reports. Reports will be intercepted. And soon enough, agencies that are not supposed to exist will come knocking." "I'm prepared for that," Sarah said. Langston stopped and faced her directly. For the first time, his voice betrayed something unfamiliar. Unease. "Tell me this, Whitmore. Who activated you? Whose signature put you into Black Eagle?" Sarah shook her head. "You know I can't disclose that." His eyes narrowed. "I do know, but I also know that whoever it was must have had a reason. And I intend to find out why you were placed here, at this time, with this mission." She held his stare, unflinching. "You already know the answer, Admiral. You just don't want to admit it." A silence hung between them, thick, suffocating. Then Langston spoke again, his tone heavier. "Project Colorado. That's what you said. Do you even understand what that means?" Sarah's expression flickered, a rare crack in her composure. Enough to know it was buried. Enough to know people died when they didn't have to. Langston's shoulders stiffened, his hands clasped behind his back, knuckles white. What happened in Colorado was not a failure. It was a choice men like your father and I made because the alternative was far worse. "And you expect me to believe that?" Sarah asked. "I expect you to understand that there are truths which cannot be revealed without tearing apart the very institution you serve," Langston said, his voice rising. "Do you want the country to collapse under the weight of every secret we've ever kept? Because that's where this road leads." Sarah stepped forward, closing the space between them. "No, Admiral. I want the country to stop bleeding for lies it never consented to. If that makes me dangerous, then so be it." The old man looked at her, his face lined with years of command, and for the first time he saw not just Richard Whitmore's daughter, but someone entirely her own. A soldier who had chosen a different battlefield. The battlefield of truth. Langston exhaled long and slow, and then did something no one in the base would have imagined. He bowed his head, just slightly, the gesture not of submission, but of acknowledgement. "You may be right," he said quietly, "and that is what terrifies me." Without another word, he turned and left the room, his footsteps echoing into the distance. Sarah remained standing in the archive, her heart steady but her mind racing. She had forced the Admiral to confront something he had buried long ago. And if even a man like him trembled at the shadows of Black Eagle and Project Colorado, then she knew one thing with certainty. Whatever awaited her was far bigger than her father's anger, bigger than her own doubts. It was a reckoning that no uniform, no rank, and no oath could contain. And for the first time in years, she felt the weight of her mission settling fully onto her shoulders. The night after her encounter with Admiral Langston was long and silent. Sarah lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant hum of generators outside the barracks. The desert was quiet, but her mind was not. Every word from Langston echoed in her thoughts. His tremor of fear, his acknowledgement that what she carried was bigger than anything the room of generals and directors had dared confront. By dawn, she was summoned again. This time, not to the debriefing hall, but to a secure chamber buried beneath the base itself, a facility Sarah had not even known existed. 2 guards in plain uniforms escorted her down a stairwell of reinforced steel, past biometric scanners and doors that opened only after triple clearance. She said nothing. Neither did they. At the bottom, a single chamber awaited her. The walls were lined with projectors displaying shifting data streams, encrypted codes, and classified records. In the center, a circular table glowed with embedded light. Waiting for her was Director Ellis, his expression still unreadable, and a pair of intelligence officers in civilian attire who did not bother with introductions. Ellis gestured to the table. "Lieutenant Whitmore." "Sit," she complied, her hands folded neatly in front of her. One of the intelligence officers placed a tablet on the table, swiped, and projected a holographic image in the air. The room filled with a black and white photograph of a symbol carved into stone, an eagle with outstretched wings over a triangle, the same as her tattoo. Ella's voice was sharp. "Do you recognize this?" "I do," Sarah replied. "Then you understand the problem," he said. "This symbol officially ceased to exist in 1989. All members of Black Eagle Directive 9 were retired, debriefed, or otherwise eliminated. No new initiations were sanctioned after that date. And yet here you sit, carrying it on your skin." Sarah met his gaze, unwavering. "Your records are incomplete." The other officer leaned forward. "Are you saying the program continued in secret?" "I'm saying," Sarah replied evenly, "that the program never really ended. It evolved, quietly, independently, and with the sanction of people none of you in this room have ever met." Ellis adjusted his glasses, studying her. "If what you say is true, Lieutenant, then you are walking evidence of a breach at the highest level of government. Do you understand the weight of that?" "I understand that my existence is a threat to men who've built their careers on keeping secrets," Sarah said. Ellis narrowed his eyes. "And what of loyalty? To whom does your allegiance belong? The Army? The Eagle? Or something else entirely?" Sarah leaned forward slightly. "My loyalty is to the truth, and the truth is what terrifies you." The silence that followed was broken only by the word of the projectors. The second officer cleared his throat and shifted projection again. This time, the image showed a classified personnel file, blurred at the edges, half redacted. But one name was clear: Richard Whitmore. The officer asked, "Did you know your father was on the oversight board of the last documented Black Eagle mission?" Sarah's jaw tightened. "Yes." Ellis raised an eyebrow. "And you never thought that relevant to disclose?" "It wasn't my mission to disclose it," Sarah replied. "It was my mission to confirm whether he acted in accordance with his oath, or if he chose something else." The other officer leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. "So you admit it? You were planted here to investigate your own father." Sarah didn't flinch. "I don't admit. I confirm." The room grew tense. Ellis sat back, folding his hands together. "Then let's put on record. You're part of a program that isn't supposed to exist, operating under authority that supersedes our own. You were embedded to observe one of the most decorated generals in American history, and you've now linked him to a project buried for decades. Do you have any idea what this means?" Sarah's response was calm, measured. "It means the truth is no longer buried." The two officers exchanged a glance. Ellis tapped something into his tablet and leaned forward again. "Lieutenant Whitmore, let me be clear. If what you say is corroborated, you are untouchable. No general, no admiral, no politician can strip your authority. But if you are lying, or if this is a fabrication planted for ulterior motives, then you are guilty of treason at the highest level. Do you understand the stakes?" "I understand," Sarah said. "But I also understand that fear of exposure doesn't erase the truth. You want to know why this tattoo shouldn't exist? Because men like you buried the program, erased the files, and pretended the oath sworn by its members would fade with time. But the eagle doesn't fade. It watches. It waits. And when the time comes, it moves." Ellis' fingers hovered over his tablet. But he didn't type. His eyes flicked to her, reading her face for any crack, any deception. There was none. Finally, he leaned back. "You'll remain confined to this facility until further notice. Effective immediately, you are restricted from outside communication. If Black Eagle still exists as you claim, they'll make contact. And when they do, we'll know you're telling the truth." Sarah rose from her chair slowly. "They already know," she said. Ellis' expression shifted for the first time since she met him. Just slightly, a shadow of unease across his face. The guards returned to escort her back to the upper levels. As she walked, she felt the weight of unseen eyes on her. Not the ordinary surveillance of cameras or officers, but something deeper. Black Eagle operatives had always been ghosts, unseen, unheard, until they chose otherwise. If Ellis was right, if her exposure had drawn their attention, then she would not be alone for long. And somewhere deep inside the classified layers of government, in places even admirals fear to tread, the symbol of the Black Eagle stirred once more, waking from decades of silence. General Richard Whitmore waited until facility lights dimmed to their midnight setting before making his move. Officially, the base was still operating under routine simulation schedules, but he knew better. Nothing about the last 48 hours had been routine, and the presence of Director Ellis in subterranean chambers only confirmed it. His daughter had detonated something within the military structure, something that could not be silenced with protocol or intimidation. Richard had spent his life commanding men with his voice, bending chaos into order, but now that voice shook with questions he could no longer suppress. He demanded answers, not from Ellis, not from Langston, but from Sarah herself. And he would not wait for another summer meeting or classified briefing. He entered the restricted quarters where she'd been confined, bypassing the guards with a code that no one dare question. The room was bare, steel walls, a narrow bed, and a single lamp that cast long shadows across the floor. Sarah sat upright on the edge of the bed, her boots laced, posture straight as if she had expected him. "Father," she said, her tone calm but edged with steel. "I wondered how long it would take before you came." Richard closed the door behind him, stepping into the room with the weight of a man carrying more than stars on his shoulders. "You will not address me like I am some stranger in uniform. You will explain yourself. Now." Sarah's eyes flickered with a mix of weariness and resolve. "You want answers, but I doubt you'll accept them." "Try me," Richard said sharply. "I've earned that much after decades of service. You show up here, carrying a mark that hasn't been seen since before you were born, and suddenly every officer within 300 miles is whispering about my bloodline. You think I can tolerate that without understanding why?" Sarah stood, facing him. The resemblance between them was undeniable. Same sharp jaw, same unflinching eyes, but where his gaze carried authority, hers carried defiance. "You want to know why?" she said. "Because there are things even a general wasn't allowed to know. You lived your career believing you held the highest clearance. You didn't. Black Eagle existed above you, beyond you, and whether you admit it or not, you crossed paths with him long ago." Richard's hands curled into fists at his sides. "Do not lecture me about clearances. Do not presume to know what I lived through while you were still learning to salute. I know what Black Eagle was. I know it was disbanded, dissolved for good reason. And now you stand before me claiming not only to wear its mark, but to outrank me because of it. How? Who put you there? Tell me." Sarah took a step closer, lowering her voice. "You really don't know, do you? That's what frightens you most. You think you controlled every chapter of this family's history, but there are files you never touched, operations you were deliberately cut off from. And in those shadows, they chose me, not you." Her words landed like a strike, and Richard's face darkened. "They used you," he said, his voice tight. "Whoever they are, they've turned you against your own blood. Against me." "No," Sarah said firmly. "They gave me the chance to see the truth you buried. Do you even remember Colorado?" The name hit him like a slap. His composure cracked for the briefest moment, and Sarah saw it. "You do remember," she pressed. "The villages, the civilians, the men you left behind. You told the world it was a victory, but you and I both know what it really was." Richard's chest heaved. For the first time, the legendary general looked less like a commander and more like a man cornered by ghosts. "You weren't there. You have no idea the choices we had to make." "I've read the file that survived," Sarah said. "I've spoken to those who lived through the aftermath. You can hide behind necessity all you want, but what happened wasn't strategy. It was compromise, and compromise cost innocent lives." Richard slammed a hand against the steel wall, the sound reverberating. "You think war is clean? You think victory comes without sacrifice? You know nothing of the burdens I've carried. And you think medals absolve you? Sarah shot back. They don't. The truth doesn't vanish because you refuse to speak it. You build a career on silence, father. But silence has an expiration date. For a long moment, they stood in heavy quiet, their breaths loud in the confined room. Finally, Richard's voice softened, not with tenderness, but with desperation. Tell me who brought you into Black Eagle, he said, almost pleading now. Tell me who signed your name. Sarah shook her head slowly. I can't. That's not how this works. Richard stared at her, his jaw tightening. Then you're telling me nothing. You're my daughter. But I don't know who you are anymore. You're standing here with secrets that can dismantle everything I built. Sarah's eyes softened, though her voice did not. Maybe it's time it was dismantled. He flinched at her words as if she'd struck him. For a second, the mask of the general slipped, revealing the man beneath. The father who had once lifted her onto his shoulders, the widower who had buried a wife without ever knowing how to grieve. But just as quickly, the mask returned. You may think you outdrank me on paper, he said, stepping toward the door. But blood outranks everything. Remember that. He left without another word, the door slamming shut behind him. Sarah remained standing in the stillness, her heart pounding not from fear, but from the weight of what she had seen in her father's eyes. He was not just angry, he was afraid. And if General Richard Whitmore was afraid, then the storm she had unleashed was far greater than she had even imagined. The order came at first light. A coded transmission, marked with the highest urgency, summoned every ranking officer, intelligence liaison, and government observer station at the base. By 7 o'clock sharp, the main conference chamber, designed for wartime strategy coordination, was transformed into something else entirely. The polished screens that usually displayed battle simulations now displayed lock feeds marked with a single word: classified. General Richard Whitmore arrived early, his presence as severe as the storm brooding in his chest. He had not slept. The confrontation with his daughter had left him unsettled, though he buried the feeling beneath his usual armor of authority. He took his seat at the head of the table, eyes fixed forward, jaw locked. Rear Admiral Langston entered next, his steps slower than usual, as if weighed down by the knowledge he had carried since Sarah's tattoo had been revealed. He avoided Richard's gaze and instead moved to his place on the opposite side of the long steel table. Director Ellis arrived flanked by aides carrying black cases. His expression was sharper now, less detached, as though even his practiced neutrality was beginning to crack. The civilian bureaucrat had turned into something more dangerous, a man holding secrets no one else wanted to hear aloud. The other officers filtered in, taking their places in tense silence. The hum of projectors filled the room until Ellis raised a hand. This meeting is not on record, he said flatly. No transcripts, no observers. What we discuss here will not exist outside this room, and yet its consequences will ripple through every command structure in the nation. You all know why we are here. The incident with Lieutenant Whitmore has forced our hand. A murmur passed through the officers, some shifting uneasily in their seats. Langston spoke first. We must address the reality before us. The emblem displayed on Lieutenant Whitmore's back was not fabricated. It is authentic. And authenticity means only one thing. Black Eagle Protocol remains active. Whether any of us were meant to know it or not, the truth is standing among us. General Whitmore's fist clenched. You speak as if this is a revelation. That mark has no authority. The program ended. It was meant to end. If she carries it, then someone is using her, manipulating her, and we are all falling into their trap by entertaining this meeting. Ellis interjected, his voice precise. General, with respect, you do not get to decide whether this is entertained. The insignia carries recognition at levels higher than your command. That is a matter of fact, not interpretation. The presence of your daughter here raises questions none of us can ignore. Another officer, a brigadier with years of combat command, leaned forward. Questions? It raises chaos. If she truly holds rank beyond ours, then by law we are bound to follow her directives. And yet she refuses to disclose who authorized her or for what purpose. That is not command. That is anarchy. Langston's eyes narrowed. Anarchy is pretending she doesn't exist. She was placed here for a reason. Until we understand why. Dismissing her only puts us in greater danger. Richard finally snapped, his voice booming across the chamber. The reason she is here is obvious. Someone is using her to tear down everything we've built. I will not let my bloodline be turned into a weapon against this nation. Ellis turned toward him, calm but with an edge like a blade. Or perhaps, General, your bloodline was a weapon all along. The words hung heavy in the air. Richard's face hardened, but he did not reply. Ellis tapped his tablet, and the screens flickered to life. Photographs appeared, grainy, aged but damning. Images of mountain ranges scarred with blast craters, civilians huddled in burned-out ruins, soldiers in unmarked gear dragging bodies into trucks. Across the bottom corner of each image was a classification code, Project Colorado. The room fell silent. Even those who had only heard rumors of the name recognized what they were seeing. Some of you already know, Ellis said. Some of you have pretended not to. Project Colorado was never a clean operation. It was a cover-up that cost hundreds of civilian lives and destroyed entire villages. The files were sealed, the story rewritten. But fragments survived. Enough for those outside the chain of command to take notice. And apparently, enough for Black Eagle to take action. Langston spoke softly. They sent her because Colorado is not finished haunting us. One of the intelligence officers stood abruptly. If these images ever see the public, we lose everything. Confidence in the military, confidence in leadership, careers, alliances, stability. This cannot go beyond this room. Sarah's voice came from the doorway. It already has. Every head turned. She stood framed by the light from the corridor, flanked by 2 silent guards who'd been ordered to bring her. Her presence was a disruption none of them had anticipated, but no one dared dismiss her. She stepped forward, her boots striking the floor with deliberate rhythm. You called an emergency meeting to discuss me. Fine, then let me give you the truth you keep circling around. Black Eagle didn't recruit me by accident. They placed me here because they knew Project Colorado wasn't buried deep enough. They knew someone inside this room was responsible for what happened, and they knew the only way to reveal it was to put me in your midst. Richard rose to his feet, fury in his eyes. Enough. Sarah faced him, unflinching. You want answers, Father? Here they are. I was tasked to observe you, to confirm that the files naming you as an architect of Colorado were true. And now, after what I've seen here, after your silence, I know they are. The chamber erupted, officers shouting over one another, accusations flying, denials and warnings blending into chaos. But Sarah's words cut through it all, sharp as steel. Langston slammed his hand on the table. Order. The noise subsided, though the tension remained thick. Ellis studied Sarah carefully, then spoke with measured calm. If what you say is true, Lieutenant Whitmore, then the integrity of this entire command is compromised. And you are the only one in this room whose authority cannot be questioned. So tell us, what do you intend to do? Sarah's gaze swept across the room, pausing on her father, then Langston, then Ellis. Her voice was steady, resolute. What I was trained to do, finish my mission. The room froze again, the weight of her declaration pressing against every man and woman seated at the table. In that moment, the emergency meeting became more than a debate over authority or secrecy. It became the beginning of a reckoning that none of them could control. And for the first time, General Richard Whitmore realized he was not the one commanding the room. His daughter was. The room remained suffocatingly still after Sarah's words. Officers exchanged wary glances, torn between outrage and the paralyzing knowledge that every syllable she spoke carried more authority than their own. General Whitmore had not sat down. His hands were gripping the edge of the table, so tightly the knuckles whitened, his posture unshakable, but his silence betraying what Sarah claimed. Rear Admiral Langston, the first to recover, leaned forward. Lieutenant, you've made a statement that links this room directly to one of the most classified failures in our history. You understand what happens if that accusation is substantiated. Sarah didn't flinch. Yes, Admiral, which is why I'm not accusing blindly. I have evidence. The projection screens flickered again. A secure file opened, displaying a series of heavily redacted mission logs. Most of the lines were blacked out, but a single name appeared repeatedly in the authorization column. General Richard Whitmore. The room erupted with mutters, some in disbelief, others in anger. Richard himself slammed his hand against the table, his voice cutting through the noise. Those records prove nothing. I signed hundreds of operational approvals. That doesn't mean I directed the execution. Sarah met his eyes. Then explain why your initials appear beside the command to neutralize Sector 4, where non-combatants were later confirmed to be hiding. The silence that followed was unbearable. Langston broke it with a low voice. She's right. That authorization was never supposed to exist in writing. Ellis shifted in his chair, tapping a sequence on his tablet. Project Colorado has been the most tightly sealed file in our archives. For fragments like this to survive, someone either failed to purge them or ensure they remained. Sarah took a slow breath before continuing. It wasn't failure. It was intention. Certain operatives knew the truth would eventually surface. They embedded these files deep enough that one day, someone like me would find them. And when I did, Black Eagle reactivated my clearance. That's why I'm here. One of the brigadiers slammed his fist against the table. This is madness. We're chasing ghosts and conspiracies while the chain of command collapses. Project Colorado was a sealed matter. No one here has the authority to reopen it. Sarah's eyes locked onto him. Wrong. I do. The words landed like a blade. No one spoke after. Even those who resented her authority knew she wasn't exaggerating. The tattoo on her back, the directive embedded in it, had been recognized by the highest security protocols. Whether they liked it or not, her words carried the weight of command. Richard finally broke the silence, his voice calmer now, but dripping with controlled rage. Sarah, do you even know what Colorado was? What it truly was? You think you've uncovered the whole truth, but you've seen only the fragments they wanted you to see. You weren't there when decisions were made. You didn't face what we face in those mountains. Sarah stepped closer to the table. Then tell us. Tell them. What happened in Colorado? The officers leaned in, some out of dread, others out of desperate curiosity. Richard's jaw tightened. For the first time in his long career, he hesitated to speak. Finally, his words came low and sharp. Colorado wasn't about insurgents or civilians. It was about containment. A biological leak engineered in a covert lab operating under the Department of Defense. An experiment gone wrong. We were sent not to protect, but to erase. Villages weren't collateral damage. They were the experiment. And my orders were to ensure nothing survived. Gasps rippled through the room. Langston closed his eyes, shaking his head as if the admission confirmed a weight he had carried for years. Ellis, however, leaned forward, expression unreadable. You're confessing, Ellis said quietly. Richard shot him a glare. I'm contextualizing. Without full understanding, this narrative becomes treason. The American people were never supposed to know, not because of corruption, but because exposure would destabilize the very trust that holds our military together. Sarah's voice cut through, steady as steel. You killed innocents and called it stability. That's not service. That's betrayal. Richard's hand slammed against the table. I did what was necessary. Do you think I enjoyed signing those orders? Do you think I wanted their blood on my name? I carried it so others wouldn't have to. Men like me shoulder the burden, so naive idealists like you can play at morality without facing the weight of real war. The officers sat frozen. No one dared intervene. It was no longer a debate between command and subordinates. It was a battlefield between father and daughter, and every word was a strike. Sarah's eyes burned into his. And what about the survivors, father? Because there were some. You left them to rot in silence. But they lived. And they remembered. One of them was the source that led me here. Richard's face drained of color. Impossible. No one survived. Sarah pulled a data drive from her pocket, placing it on the table, then explained this testimony. Recorded 5 years ago. A survivor from Sector 4 who identified you by name. He watched your orders executed. He buried his family in the ruins your soldiers left behind. The room erupted again, this time with outrage and disbelief. Officers shouted over each other, some demanding the drive be destroyed, others insisting on immediate review. Ellis raised his voice above them all. This changes everything. If her testimony is authenticated, it is no longer an internal matter. It becomes congressional. It becomes political. Langston's voice was grim, and it becomes uncontrollable. Sarah's words silenced them all once more. That's why Black Eagle exists. To do what the rest of you can't. To face the truth when it's easier to bury it. Richard stared at her, his face pale, his composure cracking under the weight of her revelation. For the first time, the legendary general looked like a man cornered not by enemies, but by the truth itself. And Sarah knew then that her mission was nearing its breaking point. The storm she had carried into this base was no longer just circling. It was about to strike. The testimony Sarah placed on the table was like a splinter lodged under the skin of the entire command. No one could ignore it, yet no one dared to handle it either. Hours after the emergency meeting dispersed, the officers left in uneasy silence, their faces pale and their words clipped. Only a handful remained behind. Langston, Ellis, and 2 intelligence analysts tasked with verifying the data drive. General Whitmore exited without speaking a word, his posture rigid, as if walking away from the chamber would distance him from the accusations now hanging over his head. Sarah did not leave. She stood in the corner, watching the analysts work. Her arms were crossed, her jaw tight, but her eyes betrayed an anticipation she could not fully suppress. She had brought the proof into the open, but proof was nothing without confirmation, and confirmation required courage from men who had built careers out of silence. The analysts worked quietly, connecting the drive to a secured interface isolated from all networks. Within moments, encrypted files cascaded across the screen. Ellis stepped closer, adjusting his glasses. "Open the testimony first," he instructed. The video flickered to life. The recording showed a man in his late 40s, sitting in a dimly lit room. His face was lined, his hair streaked with gray, but his eyes carried a haunting sharpness. He spoke with a heavy accent, but his words were clear. "I was there. Sector 4. They told us we were safe. Soldiers came, wearing American uniforms. We believed them. Then the fire came. The bombs. My family!" His voice broke. He looked down, fighting tears before continuing. "I saw the man who gave the order. I remember his face. He was older than the others. He spoke with authority. They called him General Whitmore." The recording ended abruptly, as though the man could not continue. The silence in the chamber stretched, heavy and suffocating. Langston's face was stone. Ellis remained impassive, but his grip on the tablet tightened. Finally, one of the analysts cleared his throat. "Sir, there's more. Secondary files. They appear to be linked directly to Colorado." Ellis gestured. "Open them." The analysts obeyed. What appeared next made even Langston draw a sharp breath. It was not just survivor testimony. It was mission data, hidden, deeply buried in an archive mislabeled under a logistics code. The files contained troop movement orders, drone strike authorizations, supply logs, all stamped with the same oversight signature, Richard Whitmore. Sarah leaned forward, her pulse quickening. "You see? It was never erased. Someone made sure these survived." One analyst frowned. "But why hide them here? Why leave breadcrumbs in a system that was supposed to be purged decades ago?" Langston's voice was low. "Because someone wanted them to be found. Not now, not immediately, but eventually. A dead drop for the future." Ellis tapped his tablet, processing the files into his own secured memory bank. This level of concealment would require someone with extraordinary clearance, not just to access classified archives, but to rewrite them in a way that bypassed every audit for decades. Whoever did this wasn't simply covering their tracks. They were planting evidence. Sarah spoke with quiet certainty. Black Eagle, this is their work. They don't erase history. They preserve it for when it's needed. Langston looked at her, troubled. If that's true, then it means they've been watching all of us for years. Every decision, every command. waiting for the moment to act. Ellis finally turned toward Sarah. His voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp. "Lieutenant, if you've known about this file, why reveal it now? Why not wait until the chain of command could handle it through internal review?" Sarah didn't hesitate. "Because internal review is where the truth goes to die. I revealed it now because the time for silence is over. My mission was not just to observe. It was to expose when opportunity presented itself. That opportunity is here." One of the analysts suddenly stiffened. "Sir, there's something else. A restricted section inside the archive. Access requires dual clearance, Black Eagle and Senate intelligence signatures." Ellis's head snapped toward him. "Can you open it?" The analyst hesitated. "Not without authorization codes. But," he glanced at Sarah, "if she truly holds Black Eagle clearance, her biometric might unlock it." All eyes turned to her. Sarah stepped forward without hesitation and placed her hand on the scanner. The device hummed, analyzing her prints and retinal scan. A moment later, the lock disengaged with a faint chime. The restricted archive unfolded before them, revealing dozens of sealed documents. Ellis's voice dropped to a whisper. "My God!" The first document opened, displaying an operation report stamped with both the Black Eagle insignia and the seal of the United States Senate Intelligence Committee. The date was over 20 years old, yet the wording was chillingly precise. "Project Colorado is hereby classified as a joint containment and eradication initiative. Civilian casualties are acknowledged as unavoidable. Authorization granted under Emergency Wartime Protocol. Oversight Board includes General Richard Whitmore." Langston exhaled sharply. There it is, the smoking gun. Sarah's expression was unreadable. She had known fragments, but seeing the full document was confirmation that her mission had reached its core. Her father's signature was not an accident, not an implication. It was direct involvement, sanctioned at the highest level. Richard himself was nowhere near the chamber, but his absence weighed heavily, as though the revelation itself had pulled him into the room. Sarah clenched her jaw, her mind torn between duty and blood. The man who had raised her in the shadow of honor had built his legacy on a lie so dark it infected the very institution she swore to defend. Ellis finally straightened. "This cannot be contained here. It will escalate. Senate hearings, possibly even a tribunal. The evidence is too strong. If we don't act now, someone else will leak it." Langston's eyes met Sarah's. "You realize what this means, don't you? Your father will not survive this. Not as a general. Not as a leader. Not as the man the country believes him to be." Sarah's voice was steady, though her chest ached. "Then he'll face the same judgment every soldier should when they fail their oath. No one is above the truth, not even him." The weight of her words fell like a final verdict. And in that moment, the hidden file stopped being just an archive of the past. It became a weapon aimed not at enemies abroad, but at the heart of the American command itself. The discovery of the hidden archive shattered the last illusions of control inside the Nevada base. Word spread in whispers that never appeared in reports, carried on tense glances between officers and the hurried movements of aides rushing between locked offices. Though officially classified, everyone knew the files Sarah had revealed were too explosive to stay buried. By nightfall, General Richard Whitmore had isolated himself in one of the hangars, a cavernous space lined with dormant aircraft and the scent of fuel clinging to the air. He had ordered the hangar cleared, citing maintenance checks, but the truth was simpler. He needed a place where no one would interrupt him. Sarah entered without hesitation. She knew where to find him. For all their differences, she still understood the rhythm of his habits. He stood near the open bay doors, the desert stretching before him, a solitary figure against the darkness. His posture was rigid, but his hands, clasped tightly behind his back, betrayed the tension coursing through him. "You've been avoiding me," Sarah said, her voice echoing softly through the hangar. Richard did not turn. "I've been avoiding everyone." She walked closer, her boots striking the concrete floor. "That won't work anymore. The files are out. They've seen your name, your orders. You can't hide from this." Finally, he faced her. His eyes were bloodshot, not from weakness, but from a man who had fought too long against the collapse of his own defenses. You think you won something, Sarah? You think exposing me gives you justice? All you've done is weaken the very foundation that keeps this country alive. Sarah stopped a few feet away from him. Justice isn't weakness. Cover-ups are. The truth doesn't destroy foundations. It rebuilds them stronger. He laughed bitterly. Stronger? Do you have any idea what will happen when the Senate gets those files? They'll drag me through the mud, yes, but it won't stop there. Every soldier who served under my command will be questioned. Every operation I ever sign will be scrutinized. Morale will fracture. Trust in the chain of command will erode. And for what? To prove that I was human enough to fail. Sarah's voice sharpened. Failing isn't a crime. Hiding it is. Richard's jaw tightened. You were never meant to see this. You were never meant to be dragged into Black Eagle. If I had known, you would have stopped it? Sarah interrupted. That's the problem. You'd rather bury the truth than let it breathe. That's why they didn't trust you. That's why they chose me instead. For the first time, Richard's face showed pain. Not anger, not fury, but something closer to loss. They turned you against me. No, Sarah said quietly. You did that yourself. The words cut deeper than any accusation before. He stepped back slightly, as if recoiling from the weight of them. The silence that followed was long and suffocating, broken only by the faint hum of the hangar's lights. Richard finally spoke, his voice lower. Do you even know what it was like in Colorado? Do you know what we were ordered to contain? You think it was just civilians caught in the crossfire, but it wasn't that simple. The experiment was real. The threat was real. If we hadn't acted, the infection would have spread beyond control. Thousands, maybe millions, could have died. I gave the orders because someone had to. Sarah met his gaze. Then why not tell the truth? Why erase it? Because truth isn't always survivable. Richard roared, his voice echoing off the steel walls. Do you think the public would have understood? Do you think our allies would have stayed loyal if they knew we tested weapons on our own soil? Sometimes silence is the only way to protect the greater good. Sarah's reply came like a blade. Silence isn't protection. It's surrender. You didn't shield the country. You shielded yourself. The word struck him harder than he expected. His shoulders sagged just slightly, as if the weight of decades finally pressed too heavy. He turned away, staring out into the desert night. You think I'm a monster, he said softly. Sarah shook her head. I think you're a coward. He spun back toward her, fury flashing in his eyes, but before he could speak, she raised her voice. A coward who let fear dictate every decision. Fear of exposure. Fear of judgment. Fear that if people saw the cracks in your armor, they'd stop calling you a hero. That's what this was about all along, not protecting the nation, but protecting the image of General Whitmore. Richard's chest heaved, his breath ragged. You don't understand what it means to carry that title. And you don't understand what it means to earn it, she replied. The two locked eyes, father and daughter, soldier and soldier, bound by blood yet divided by truth. The hangar felt less like a room and more like a battlefield, their words striking harder than bullets. Finally, Richard lowered his head. His voice was rough, almost broken. So this is how it ends. My daughter, standing as my judge. No, Sarah said. Not your judge. Your witness. Everything you've done is already recorded. I delivered the files to the Senate this morning. The tribunal will happen with or without you. Richard's eyes widened. You what? I sent them through secure channels before I came here. Sarah said firmly. It's over, father. The truth isn't waiting for permission anymore. He staggered back a step, as though the revelation had physically struck him. His career, his legacy, the carefully constructed empire of silence he had built over decades. It was crumbling in real time, dismantled not by enemies abroad, but by his own blood. Richard's voice cracked. You've destroyed me. Sarah's eyes softened, but her words remained resolute. No, you destroyed yourself. I just refuse to help you hide it. The silence stretched again. Richard's hand twitched at his side, as though some part of him wanted to lash out to reassert control. But he didn't. The fire in him dimmed, replaced by something hollow. He looked at his daughter one last time, not with anger, not even with betrayal, but with something closer to sorrow. "Then may God forgive you," he whispered, "because I never will." He turned and walked out the hangar, his steps heavy, his figure swallowed by the shadows. Sarah remained alone, her chest rising and falling with the weight of everything that had been said. She had delivered the truth, as her mission required, but the cost was carved into her heart. For the first time, she felt the full gravity of her choice. She had dismantled her father not with bullets, not with combat, but with truth. And truth, she realized, was the sharpest weapon of all. By the following week, the Nevada base had transformed from a training ground into a fortress of containment. Civilian contractors were sent home on the guise of budget reallocation. All non-essential military personnel were reassigned to other commands. What remained was a skeleton of high-ranking officers, intelligence agents, and a constant stream of encrypted transmissions bouncing between Washington and the desert. The files Sarah had sent to the Senate were no longer whispers. They had become a storm. A classified congressional committee convened behind closed doors, its members summoned in haste. Some senators arrived furious, others terrified. What united them was a realization that decades of silence had been pierced, and the public would soon demand an explanation. Sarah was escorted to Washington under heavy guard. She traveled not in uniform, but in civilian clothing, an intentional choice to strip her of visible rank and keep her presence ambiguous. But the tattoo on her back still burned like an invisible standard, its authority undeniable. Her first briefing in the Capitol was in a chamber deep below the Capitol itself, far from cameras or press. A semicircle of senators sat before her, their expressions unreadable. At the center sat Senator Callaway, a man whose booming voice and reputation for iron discipline had made him a fixture of national security committees for over 20 years. "Lieutenant Whitmore," Callaway began, his tone carefully neutral, "you have placed before this body evidence of extraordinary weight. Evidence that implicates not only decorated officers, but entire structures of oversight. Do you confirm the files transmitted to this committee came from you?" Sarah stood tall, hands clasped behind her back. "I confirm." "And do you confirm," Callaway continued, "that you were authorized by Black Eagle Directive 9 to retrieve and reveal these files?" "I do." The murmurs around the chamber were sharp, fearful. One senator leaned forward. "Black Eagle is a myth, a rumor. You expect us to believe it holds real authority over this body." Sarah's eyes fixed on him. "Believe what you want. The fact remains, the tattoo on my back carries more weight than your disbelief. It opened files even your committee couldn't access. Files that prove the truth about Project Colorado. That is authority you cannot erase." The senator leaned back, silenced. Callaway raised a hand, quieting the whispers. His eyes narrowed. "Your father, General Richard Whitmore, has been named repeatedly in these documents. If this evidence is authentic, the consequences for him are catastrophic. Why should we trust the word of a daughter against her own blood?" Sarah's voice was calm but cutting. "Because my loyalty is to the country, not a surname. If you want blind obedience to family, you should look elsewhere. I was chosen precisely because I could sever blood from duty." A heavy silence followed. The senators shifted uncomfortably, knowing her words cut to the heart of their own dilemmas. Many of them, too, had chosen silence to protect their institutions, their allies, their careers. Now they were faced with someone who had chosen differently and dared them to do the same. Finally, Senator Callaway spoke again. "You are aware, Lieutenant, that by presenting this evidence you initiated a chain of consequences that may destabilize the very core of our military command." "Yes," Sarah said, "and I accept that. Stability built on lies is not stability at all. It is rot waiting to collapse." Behind Callaway, aides exchanged hurried notes. The session adjourned with no decision, only promises of further review. But Sarah knew the tide had already shifted. News did not take long to break. Though the files themselves remained sealed, the very fact that a classified committee had convened on irregular military operations leaked to the press within hours. Major outlets ran headlines speculating about covert projects, hidden atrocities, and accountability reaching the highest levels. The name Colorado appeared in hushed tones on late-night broadcasts, always accompanied by the phrase, unconfirmed sources. For the first time in his career, General Richard Whitmore appeared on the defensive. Cameras caught him exiting Pentagon meetings, his jaw tight, his responses clipped. No comment became his refrain, but silence only fueled suspicion. Allies in Congress began to distance themselves. Old friends in the military stopped returning calls. His empire of iron discipline was crumbling, not from battlefield defeat, but from exposure. Meanwhile, Sarah refused all interview requests. She moved between secure locations under constant surveillance, her movements tracked by men who called themselves her protectors, but whom she knew were also her watchers. Black Eagle operatives, unseen and unnamed, occasionally slipped notes into her quarters. Brief acknowledgments that she was not alone, that her mission was unfolding exactly as intended. Then came the twist no one anticipated. Senator Callaway himself appeared on national television in a rare live address. Flanked by 2 other senior senators, his voice carried the weight of authority. Tonight, I confirm that this body has received evidence concerning past military operations under the designation of Project Colorado. While details remain classified, the evidence is credible enough to warrant immediate action. Effective immediately, General Richard Whitmore is relieved of command pending tribunal review. Further, this committee acknowledges the existence of Black Eagle Oversight Authority. Though controversial, its role has been deemed lawful under executive order. The American people will receive a full report in due course. The announcement struck the nation like a hammer. Overnight, the decorated general became a fallen idol. Supporters cried betrayal, while critics demanded harsher punishment. Military forums buzzed with disbelief. For the first time, whispers of Black Eagle reached the public sphere, no longer rumor but confirmation. Richard watched the broadcast from a secure Pentagon office. His hands trembled, though he masked it behind a glass of water. Around him, aides avoided his eyes. He was no longer the untouchable general. He was a man awaiting judgment. Sarah, watching from her secure location, felt the weight of the moment pressed down on her chest. She had completed her mission. The truth was no longer hidden. Yet victory tasted hollow. She had not only toppled a general, she had toppled her father. Langston, standing quietly beside her, finally spoke. "You've changed everything. But be careful, Lieutenant. When you tear down pillars, the building doesn't always fall the way you want it to." Sarah didn't respond. She stared at the flickering screen, at the image of her father standing pale and silent as the world turned against him. And in the silence of that room, she realized that exposure was only the beginning. The storm had broken, but the wreckage was still to come. Months passed. The whirlwind of hearings, closed-door sessions, and relentless media frenzy slowly dissolved into a quieter, more insidious aftermath. Project Colorado no longer dominated headlines. Other crises had taken its place. International disputes, economic reports, scandals that captured the fickle attention of the public. Yet beneath the surface, the fallout continued to reshape the foundation of the military establishment. General Richard Whitmore was stripped of his command and placed under tribunal review. Though the proceedings remained classified, rumors swirled about dishonorable discharge, forfeiture of honors, even potential criminal charges. For a man who had once commanded entire divisions with a word, the silence around him was the harshest punishment of all. He became a ghost in his own country, a name whisper with equal parts contempt and disbelief. Sarah Whitmore, however, chose exile, not forced upon her, but self-imposed. She declined every offer to assume higher command, every invitation to testify further before committees eager to legitimize her as a symbol of reform. She did not want to be a symbol. She wanted anonymity. She disappeared from Washington, leaving behind secure facilities and guarded apartments, vanishing into quiet corners of the country where no one recognized her face. For 3 months, she lived in reclusion in a small town along the New England coast. She rented a cabin by the sea, where the air smelled of salt and pine, where fishermen rose at dawn, and where her neighbors saw her only as a quiet woman who paid her bills on time and asked for little. She spent her days walking along the rocky shore, nights sitting by the fire with books she rarely finished. The silence was both sanctuary and torment. For the first time in years, there were no orders to follow, no missions to execute, no secrets to guard. Yet the absence of purpose gnawed at her. She had toppled her father's empire, revealed one of the darkest truths buried by the government, and in doing so, she had fulfilled her mission. But missions end, and when they do, soldiers are left alone with themselves. One rainy evening, as she sat by the fire, there was a knock on her cabin door. The sound startled her, not because it was loud, but because so few ever came. She opened it cautiously, half expecting a local fisherman or a delivery gone astray. Instead, a man in plain clothes stood before her. His hair was short, his stance unmistakably military, though no insignia gave him away. He extended a small envelope. "From someone who knew your mother," he said simply. Sarah froze, her hand trembling slightly as she accepted it. But when she looked up to ask who he was, the man was already walking away, disappearing into the mist as though he had never existed. Inside the cabin, she lit another lamp and opened the envelope. Inside was a single folded page, yellowed at the edges. The handwriting was unmistakable, her mother's. "Sarah, if this letter has found you, it means the truth has reached you sooner than I expected. Your father carries burdens he cannot speak of, not because he doesn't want to, but because he isn't allowed. He chose silence, not out of cowardice, but because there are truths no one man should release alone. I never wanted you caught in this shadow, but I knew one day you might be. When that day comes, remember, secrets are heavier than they appear. If you expose them, be ready to carry what follows." Sarah read the letter twice, then 3 times, her chest tightening with each word. Her mother had died when she was young, taken by illness before Sarah truly understood the complexities of her family. To see her handwriting again, to hear her voice through these lines, it felt like a haunting and a comfort all at once. But the letter carried something more than sentiment. It carried weight. Her mother had known. She had known about Project Colorado, about Richard's silence, about the shadows that lingered over the family. And though she had never spoken of it aloud, she had left Sarah this warning, that the truth was never clean and that exposure came with a price. Sarah folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope, staring into the fire. She thought of her father, not the general, but the man, the widower who had once sat at her mother's bedside, powerless against death, the man who had carried silence not just for his country, but perhaps to shield Sarah from ever stepping into the same darkness. And yet here she was. She had chosen the truth, and it had cost her him. Days turned into weeks. The coastal town accepted her silence as part of her character, and she allowed herself to blend into its rhythm. She learned the names of the tides, the patterns of gulls, the comfort of anonymity. And yet, the letter remained on her desk, a constant reminder that her story was not finished. One morning, as she walked ashore at low tide, she spotted a figure standing by the rocks. Not a fisherman, not a local, the man in plain clothes again. He said nothing as she approached. He only handed her a second envelope before turning to leave. This one contained no letter, no handwriting, only a single key marked with the insignia of the Black Eagle. Sarah closed her hand around it, the weight of it pressing into her palm. The silence she had carved for herself was ending. Black Eagle was calling her again. And though she longed for peace, she knew the truth of her mother's words. Secrets were heavier than they appeared, and her burden was far from over. The key sat heavy in Sarah's hand for days, as though it contained not just metal but history itself. She kept it in her pocket as she walked ashore, slept with it on the nightstand beside her bed, and often found herself clutching it unconsciously, as though her body already knew its weight better than her mind could process. The insignia stamped into the metal, the eagle, wings spread over a dark triangle, was not merely a reminder of what she had revealed. It was a summons. Black Eagle had never been about ceremony or recruitment. Its members did not gather in public halls or display their allegiance with medals. It was a current that moved beneath the surface, surfacing only when a nation's survival depended on truths others could not face. By delivering the key, they were telling her that her exile was over. Her mission was not finished. Yet Sarah hesitated. For the first time in her life, Hesitation was not about orders or consequences. It was about herself. She had grown up chasing the approval of her father, had rebelled by questioning his commands, had been chosen by an invisible order to uncover what he had buried. Every choice until now had been shaped by the shadows of others. And for once, she wanted to know if she could choose a path of her own. On the morning of her 31st birthday, Sarah returned to the military base where everything had begun. The Nevada desert greeted her with silence, its heat shimmering against the horizon. The base was not as it had been. The bustling drills were gone. The simulation halls were closed. Only a few skeleton crews remained, tending to the remnants of what had once been a proud symbol of elite training. The scandal had hollowed it out. She walked slowly through the empty corridors, her boots echoing on the tile. Rooms that had once housed officers were stripped bare, their walls stained with dust. The hangar door stood half open, creaking against the wind. The base felt less like a fortress now and more like a ruin, haunted by whispers of what had been exposed here. At last, she found herself standing in front of the office that had once belonged to General Richard Whitmore. Her father. The door was unlocked, the room untouched since his removal. She stepped inside. It was as though time had frozen. The desk was still there, a stack of folders left in disarray. A coffee mug sat cold and cracked on the corner. On the wall, a map of old operations remained pinned with fading markers. The air smelled faintly of leather and dust, with a trace of cigar smoke long absorbed into the wood. Sarah crossed the room slowly, her hand brushing across the desk. She could almost see him sitting there, his back straight, his eyes hard, his voice issuing commands with unshakable certainty. Yet now the desk was empty, the authority stripped away. All that remained was a memory of power, and the truth that had undone it. From her pocket, she pulled the small case she had carried with her from New England. Inside was her last visible symbol of rank, the lieutenant insignia she had once worn on her uniform. She placed it gently on the desk, its metallic glint catching the faint sunlight leaking through the blinds. "This ends here," she whispered, more to herself into the room. But as she turned to leave, her hand brushed against the envelope in her jacket. The letter from her mother. She stopped, pulling it free, and read the words again. "If you expose them, be ready to carry what follows." The key weighed in her other hand. One path was clear. Leave the insignia on the desk, walk out of this place, and never look back. She could vanish into the anonymity she had carved in New England, live quietly, allow others to carry the burden of secrets. But the key was a reminder that such a life would always be temporary. Black Eagle had marked her, chosen her, and their summons would not disappear because she wished it so. Her mind churned with memories. Her father's fury in the hangar, the Senate's silence as she defied them, the look in Langston's eyes when he admitted the truth terrified him. And finally, her mother's voice, echoing from words written long before Sarah had understood what they meant. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, the choice had already been made. Sarah walked to the map pinned on the wall, where dozens of colored markers still clung stubbornly to paper yellowed with age. She reached into her pocket and pressed the key against one corner of the map. It clicked softly against the surface, magnetized as though designed for this very purpose. The eagle gleamed under the light, its presence undeniable. "Then I carry it," she whispered. She left the office with nothing else in her hands. No insignia, no folders, no remnants of the past. Just the knowledge that her life would never belong entirely to her again. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly, the horizon glowing with the muted orange of dusk. She walked across the cracked pavement, her boots striking with rhythm that no longer echoed with doubt. She was no longer the general's daughter, no longer the soldier chasing his approval. She was something else now, something older, something heavier. Black Eagle had called, and she had answered. What her next mission would be, she did not know. But she understood one truth with clarity sharper than any command. Her loyalty was no longer to rank, to blood, or even to herself. It was to the country, and to the shadows that defended it when truth demanded more than silence. As the last light of day slipped beneath the horizon, Sarah Whitmore disappeared into the night. Whether history would remember her as a hero, a traitor, or something in between, she no longer cared. She had chosen, And in the end, choice was the only freedom she had ever truly wanted.